But a story that has been very much dominating the news events over the past couple of days as well has been this charge that has been made after a shooting incident involving a police officer, and the fact that yesterday we saw a lot of armed police officers putting their weapons down and effectively saying that they weren't going to carry them because they didn't have confidence in the fact that their colleague had been charged with murder. Let's talk to Tony Long now, who is a former Metropolitan Police Marksman, about the stress and the struggles for people in the police who are licensed to carry a gun. Tony, very good morning to you. Thanks for talking to us.
Good morning, Mike.
You got a piece of The Sun today where you say cops charged with murder can be left hanging for years until justice is done. There's a lot of disquiet in the force about this, obviously. We saw that sort of being represented yesterday. Tell us what is going through the mind now of the man, if you can, who's been charged with murder.
Well, obviously, I've been in that position. I shot someone in the summer of 2005 and retired in 2008 and didn't actually finally get acquitted at the Old Bailey for murder until July 2010. So I know exactly how he's feeling. Yeah. Well, I say I know exactly how he's feeling. We all deal with things in different ways, but it's certainly not going to be easy for him. And what people forget as well, is not going to be easy for his family.
Right.
Police officers are human beings. I know it doesn't seem that way, the way we're quite often portrayed, and certainly within the last couple of years. Because of a few bad apples, everybody gets tainted the same. But I think this is the issue, is that November X-ray 121's case, nobody has withdrawn their firearms authorisation specifically because he's been charged with murder. Officers have been charged with murder before, and we know that, in my case, I describe it as having been given a shit sandwich, and I knew I had to take a bite of it, and he's going to have to go through the courts, and hopefully he'll come out the end a free man. But a changed man, certainly.
And the wheels of justice move very slowly, don't they? Which probably doesn't help. But it's not a personal thing, but it's just one of those terrible things that anyone who's charged with anything has to put up with. Yeah,
there's a certain amount of truth to that, Mike. But I think one of the biggest issues is the IOPC. Most police officers would argue that it's simply not fit for purpose. When I was investigated in the summer of 2005 through to the autumn, I was investigated by mature, experienced former investigators from Customs and Excise and police and the like, who worked for the predecessor to the IPCC, which I think was the PCA. In fact, no, I correct myself. The IPCC had just been rebranded, if you like, from the PCA. And at the time, there was an MOU which basically said that the investigators, would come back after a period of 20 days, or 30 days, I think it was, and give the Chief Constable, or the Commissioner in this case, an indication as to whether any of their investigation up to that point had given any indication at all that the police officer had acted unlawfully. And if that was the case, that they didn't think he'd acted unlawfully from speaking to as many witnesses as they could within that 30-day period, then it was up to the Chief Constable to make a decision about whether to reinstate that officer. Well, that MOU just fell by the wayside. And so what's happened now is a good percentage of the investigators from the IOPC have no investigative background. Many are straight out of university with very little life skills, and they simply have no comprehension about the human dynamics of a dangerous situation where you believe your life or someone else's life is in danger. And so consequently, their investigations are taking literally years. I mean, it's not as if, and I said this yesterday to someone else, it's not as if the IOPC are given a headless, armless torso found in a waste bin and told, right, you've got to find out who this person is, you've got to investigate, you've got to interview all his friends, you've got to... It's not a murder inquiry. The person that's pulled the trigger is standing over the body with a gun. He hands the gun in, he hands his body-worn camera in and says, do you want a statement? So if you're working on a situation like that, how can an investigation take as long as it does? It's just seen that that's an unnecessary burden.
Right.
And likewise, if it's an important case like this, I mean, the Crown Prosecution Service, again, don't seem to have any time limit on decision-making.
No. And, I mean, some people are saying that, of course the police have to be investigated. Of course there has to be robust, inquiries after a gun is fired. They should expect that. But there's also a piece in the Telegraph this morning where a former former Home Office minister is saying that, maybe the CPS should reconsider the case. And without going into the detail, obviously, of the case, you know, a lot of firearms officers, we're told, are feeling quite vulnerable and are said to be reflecting on their positions as to what they do in the future.
Well, that's exactly what this handing in of blue authorisation cards is all about.
Yeah.
If you go on duty to conduct an armed operation or to patrol the streets of the capital, and when you're paraded, it's made clear to you on every occasion that you have an obligation to go and speak to your commander and say, look, I had a massive row with the wife before I came into work today. You know, I'm not in a good place. I shouldn't be going out with a gun.
Right.
And for this evening, I'm quite prepared to do anything else you want me to do, but I'm not prepared to carry a gun because I don't think I'm in the right frame of mind. You have an obligation to do that.
Right.
And that's what they've done. What they've turned around and said is, we don't believe you've got our back. We don't believe that you are looking after our interests. This raft of suggestions that the Commissioner has made to the Home Secretary, these have all been said before. And they've had promises from various governments that they would, you know, form a review, that they would look at all of these things. And none of it has happened. And so when the Commissioner's come out with this and said, look, guys, you know, we want you to come back to work, and this is what we've done, you know, we're a lot more mature and a lot more worldly wise than we were in 2005. When the Commissioner, John Stevens, turned up then, we were like, oh, yeah, great, brilliant. The boss is going to look after our interests. And all this time later, we know that they're not looking after our interests. And so if you tell us that, sorry, sir, we don't believe you.
Yeah.
And so that's what it's all about. It's about a complete lack of faith in management.
Right. And what do you think the impact will be, Tony, if, for example, the judge decides, because he's going to make a decision shortly, we believe, to unveil the officer and his identity? Because at the moment he's not been named, he's anonymous, but there is a suggestion that the judge might agree that he can be named, which is going to be pretty bad news all round, isn't it?
Well, 121 is in a slightly different position to me. When this happened to me in 2014, I went through exactly the same process that he did last Thursday when he was taken to Westminster Magistrates Court. Difference was I was properly treated like a prisoner and handcuffed and put down the cells and then transported to the Old Bailey so that I could be granted bail. And at that point, they had to make a decision about whether or not I would be allowed to keep my anonymity code, which was Echo 7.
Right.
My case was slightly different insofar as I was no longer serving. I was long retired. I'd actually retired in 2008. So whether they will make any sort of give 121 any slack, I don't know. But the reality is that the courts and certainly the press don't like anonymity. It seems that unless you're part of a grooming gang from the north of the country, you won't go to trial with anonymity. So I hate to say this, but I suspect that they will withdraw his anonymity. And I don't know what will happen. All I do know is that there are people starting to come back to work now and starting to say, yes, I am prepared to go out. If you're telling me that, you know, there is going to be another review, then okay, fair enough. I'll get my gun out of the armoury and I'll go back to work. But I think also that is on the basis that if anything else happens, you know, if you don't at least try and fulfil some of those promises, then, you know, this is going to happen all over again. And this has been so big this time. Last time it was one day and a much smaller number of officers. I think the writing really is on the wall for the Commissioner. You need to sort this out properly this time, or this is just going to come back and bite you later on down the line.
Sure. Tony, good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Tony Long there, former Metropolitan Police marksman, who himself was charged, of course, after firing a gun